given this horrific weather that we have been dealing with over most of the country, the governor of the governor of Texas, hard to tell these two Christian maniacs apart. They're both just filth. But the governor of Texas did it again. This is why, if you have any doubts, why is Mike Malloy so anti-Christian? First of all, I know the history of the Christian church and the hideous atrocities that they've committed over 1,800 years. But also because right now, here and now, these people who profess to be Christians are just the worst, the lowest of the low. Several busloads of migrants, again, were dropped off in front of Vice President Harris's residence in D.C. on Christmas Eve. The air temperature at the time was 18 degrees above 0 Fahrenheit, so the wind chill probably was around 10 degrees or maybe lower. The initial 2 busloads were taken to local shelters. That's according to an official with the Biden administration. And then more of these buses arrived outside of Kamala Harris's residence later Saturday evening. A CNN team was there, and they saw people being dropped off. Some of these migrants were wearing only T-shirts in this weather. They were immediately given blankets and put on another bus that went to a local church. A volunteer with a group called the Migrant Solidarity Mutual Aid Network, her name is Amy Fisher. She says they had been receiving, migrants sent to D.C. since this past spring. And she said that her organization had been prepared for these Saturday night arrivals. They were informed about it by an NGO worker, non-government organization worker at the border in Texas. Now, these arrivals, who were deliberately bused to the vice president's house by these filthy pigs, these subhuman Christians in Texas. They were from Ecuador, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Peru, and Colombia, according to Ms. Fisher. And she said some of the buses were supposed to go to New York, but they were diverted to D.C., some of them, due to the weather. Busloads of these folks have been arriving in Washington since April. Ms. Fisher said, quote, "The D.C. community has been welcoming buses from Texas anytime they've come since April. Christmas Eve and freezing cold weather is no different. We're always here welcoming folks with open arms." When I think about these kinds of incidences where government officials in Texas are so rotten to the core, so devoid of any kind of humanity whatsoever, that they would do this, that they would take men, women, and children and babies and throw them away, essentially. I mean, how disgusting is that? And this is exactly what these bums declare their Messiah told them not to do. But they don't care. They just don't care. And that's why I go after their religion, because there is something in their filthy religion that has taught them this. No, seriously. If they had a religion that taught them what their Messiah allegedly said, this wouldn't happen. But that's not what they're taught. They're taught greed. They're taught to be selfish, mean-spirited, hateful, tribal, everything that their so-called Messiah told them not to do. It's just, it's almost unspeakable to me. How can people do that? How can government officials in Texas or Florida put people on buses or airplanes and say, get out of here? Get out of here. Go away. There's a nonprofit that has been assisting migrants since the buses began coming to D.C. earlier this year. It's the Migrant Solidarity Network, First Response. And another group, SAMU, First Response. I'm not sure what the SAMU stands for. But they were also on the ground Saturday night helping with the folks who were arriving. And that organization's director, Tatiana Laborde, described this inhumane stunt from Texas as, quote, extremely inhumane. Extremely inhumane. But she added, and this is a part that is so true, if it were done properly, resettling people, putting them on buses, putting them on airplanes with a specific destination in mind where there would be people waiting, organizations waiting to help them assimilate into this country, to help them get jobs, help to get their kids registered to school, help them find apartments or medical care if needed. If that were the situation, then removing people from the borders is exactly what should be done. But that's not what these Christians do. And let me remind you again, it is not Jews or Muslims or Hindus who are doing this. It's Christians. Christians. Anyway, Tatiana Laborde said, quote, what we're seeing is much worse than what we see here. The 3 buses that came to D.C. are just a small portion of what they experience on a day-to-day basis. She told this to CNN this morning, today, Monday. She said, quote, if things like this are done in a coordinated and humane manner, it could really be a good option for those border towns that are struggling, end quote. And that's a point that I want to make also. I understand that cities like El Paso, for one, there are many border towns, small and medium sized, that are struggling, trying to handle this flow of migrants. But this isn't the way it should be handled by the larger society, the larger population of this country. I mean, my God, we can't take care of people. We have a policy where people who are seeking asylum for political reasons or whatever the reason is, now a lot of it is climate related. They can't make a living where in their villages, in their towns. They can't do it anymore. So they come here. And rather than give these folks a chance, the governors of 2 or 3 states, especially this filthy pig DeSantis and the sitting punk in Texas, they just gather these people up, or they have their minions do it, load them onto vehicles and throw them away. Just throw them away. As you do this to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do it to me. Did they not know that? That the part-time carpenter rabbi that they claim is divine said that? They don't give a shit. Anyway, Tatiana Laborde, who is the managing director of one of these response organizations, she said most migrants were aware of the bus's destinations. But she said about 60% eventually, no matter where they're dumped, were headed to New York. either to shelters in that city or to stay with friends and family. And she described this action as, quote, a pattern we've been seeing over the past couple of months, end quote. So agencies in New York that are struggling to deal with this would have much better chance in any city, any state would much better chance if it were a coordinated effort where all 50 states in this busting apart union were able to find within themselves, screw the religious bullshit, just find within themselves some sort of compassion for our fellow human beings and help them. Why don't we do that? And then, of course, there is the filthy, stinking Nazi racist element to this, too. Quick question. If all of the people coming into the country were coming across the northern border, if they were crossing in Seattle, if they were crossing in Detroit, if they were crossing in Montana or wherever, and they were all white and they're all coming from Canada, would they be put on buses and thrown away to D.C. or New York? Would they? Come on. You know damn good and well, and so do I, that they would not. Because, people in Canada don't speak Canadian. They speak either French or English, and for the most part, it's English, unless you live in Quebec. Supposing these migrants were coming from Quebec and spoke French with no English, which is impossible, but just assume. They probably, too, because they speak a different language. And the Christians would cite some bullshit about the Tower of Babel or something and say, well, I'm saying, no, we're not going to let these people in. I can't stand this. It's not about you, Mike. Okay, I'm just saying it is just so disgusting. Now, it is not perfectly clear who is responsible for sending the migrants to the Naval Observatory. That's where the Vice President's residence is located. CNN reported, though, earlier this year that it's the sitting governor of Texas, this weasel Greg Abbott, who is sending these buses of migrants north, including right outside Kamala Harris's home. And CNN reports that they reached out to Abbott's office for comment on this latest filthy trick from these Christians. No answer. The Biden White House, however, a staffer put the blame on Abbott, called it a, quote, cruel, dangerous, and shameful stunt. And a White House spokesperson, Abdullah Hassan, I bet that drives the Christians crazy, doesn't it? A White House spokesman named Abdullah Hassan, he said in a statement, quote, Governor Abbott abandoned children on the side of the road in below freezing temperatures on Christmas Eve without coordinating with any federal or local authorities, end quote. Yeah, I mean, can we think about that for a minute? And according to this filthy pig, Greg Abbott, I'm sure he believes that on some snowy winter's night in December, Joseph and his betrothed, who was knocked up, made it into Bethlehem. And they had no place to stay either, did they, Greg, you son of a bitch? I wonder if, does Abbott think about that? No, of course he doesn't. He's a Christian. He doesn't think about that stuff. That's what the little kids learn in Sunday school, and they only learn that so they don't turn out to be queer. Right? Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.